Welcome. This is Eric from EAI, Elemental Arts Initiative, in collaboration with Erosha, bringing you a brief preview of the cosmic weather. This upcoming season is marked by two significant retrogrades. First, we have a Mercury retrograde coming up November 25th through the beginning of December. And then we have a Mars retrograde starting on December 6th and moving through in February. Mars retrograde happens every 2 years, and it's worth us looking at the whole notion of the retrograde. I'm going to speak in a manner and use some stories and some myths to really help us to understand and appreciate the value of retrograde. The retrograde is where the planets move backwards, where energy is stymied or thwarted. And I'm going to let this weather update be an opportunity for us to reflect on the spirit of retrograde. I'm going to let Richard Rohr, whose book, Falling Upward, A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life, do some of the speaking for us today. He says in this book, none of us go into our spiritual maturity completely of our own accord or by a totally free choice. We are led by mystery, grace. Most of us have to be cajoled or seduced into it, or we fall into it through some kind of pain, some kind of transgression. The familiar and the habitual are so falsely reassuring, and most of us make our homes there permanently. The new is always, by definition, unfamiliar and untested. So life, destiny, and suffering have to give us a push, usually a big one, or we will not go. Someone has to make clear to us that our homes or the familiar is not what we are meant to live in, but only from which we are being asked to move out from. Thomas Merton, the American monk, pointed out that we may spend our whole life climbing the ladder of success, only to find that when we got to the top, that our ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. These periods of retrograde that are so maligned in our culture and our society, these periods where there are hardship, where action does not move forward, where our capacity of Mars, of life force, we in our culture think that if that is checked or stopped, we automatically see that as a negative thing. This is Mars retrograde. This is the period that's coming up. This is December 6th through February. And this is a period where there's apparent retrograde motion of the energy, where the energy in our rotating of the earth, as we come near it and it appears to go backwards, the energy, just like with Mercury retrograde, which is also here during this period of time, starting in November for several weeks into early December and overlapping, this period of time is a time for us to reconnect with our relationship to something other than ourselves, something other than the way that we've done things before, other than the habituated, other than the self and the ego that is able to just move and to do and to act. This other way of doing things that we often label as negative and bad is actually, when done right and when allowed to find its regenerative pool, much like the hero's journey, much like what Richard Rohr speaks about, is actually a recipe for regenerative growth, for spiritual growth, for moving forward. If we can see that these periods of time can be clarifying, if we can see that through the support of wisdom, we can come out of these times with more of a sense of Eros and less of a sense of Thanatos, more life force, more love, more compassion. And Richard Rohr in this book speaks quite eloquently about this. He says, normally we will not discharge our loyal soldier until they show themselves to be wanting, incapable, or inadequate for the real issues of life, as when we confront love, death, suffering, subtlety, sin, mystery, and so on. It is another form of the falling and the dying that I keep talking about. The world mythologies all point to places like Hades, hell, purgatory, and the realm of the dead. And as Scorpio is full moon against the sun in Taurus and its life, and then we've got Uranus there, and this Pluto that's opposite Mars. There's so much energy in the sky. It points to this death and this rebirth. The death, though, must happen. And it wouldn't feel like death if it wasn't uncomfortable, if it wasn't scary, if it wasn't in a space that really had us come to terms with the way that we think about our life. We must die before we die. And it's only the death of the false self. And it's maybe to think that it's not necessarily as an alternative to heaven, this hell, that is it maybe the only way to get to heaven is actually through hell, through something that is a dark place, through a time where we have to let go of the loyal soldier, that Martian warrior that's able to be there to defend us and to hold us. This hero's journey that Richard Rohr speaks about, Joseph Campbell speaks eloquently about, and so many myths portray, I'm going to take a moment to speak about a little bit here because I think it's a great encapsulation of Mars retrograde. The hero's journey is really about going from the known through the unknown back into the known. The first stage of it is where we have a call to adventure, something that provokes us and unsettles us from our everyday life. And there's something since October that's unsettled us from our everyday life. And this unsettling act is here to shake up and stir things up before it brings us down into the threshold, which is the Mars retrograde threshold. And during this period, there's a call we are summoning to leave home for an adventure of some type, not to solve a problem necessarily right away. We are not clear what the problem is. It's almost like we're being pulled forward. Now, during this adventure, and this is where Mars retrograde, we actually find the real problem. We actually find where we, in some way, are wounded or suffer or have some pain and encounter a major dilemma. And the whole story pivots around the resolution, and there's some kind of pain. What happens here is that this wound becomes sacred as it changes us and as we become something else out of this wound. As we go through this, we no longer are in our life anymore. We discover a much broader, bigger world than ourselves. There's a transformation that occurs during this death period. The retrograde period, the period where we are being asked to revitalize ourselves, to recalibrate ourselves, to reform ourselves, to reconstruct ourselves, is also a place of regeneration. It's also a place of redemption. It's also a place of reflection. And, this period coming up, can we see that it's not always about the action and the assertiveness, all of this Mars energy of go, 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 but it's also that when that's checked or when we're feeling stymied and we're feeling it's not enough, there's an opportunity for us to find wholeness. There's an opportunity for us to reconcile the parts of ourselves that we're most dismayed about. If we cannot reconcile the parts of ourselves that we're most dismayed about, we cannot reconcile parts of the world beyond that we feel dismayed about. And that this is the paradox, and that every retrograde period is an opportunity for us to hold paradox. It's an opportunity, a further deepening of the paradox. Like, for example, the Mercury retrograde that's coming up. Can we be in this space, in this technological era, when everything we need is to go fast and to move and to see when there are hiccups and when things slow down? It's actually asking us to say, maybe the most powerful thing out there is not our capacity to get our word out there, but it's our capacity to listen. It's our capacity to pause. It's our capacity to trust and to have faith that it's not us who's going to save the world. It's not us who's going to make a change or a difference in the world, but it's us witnessing and loving and being in an energy of Eros that facilitates and holds a possibility and a potential of change. And it's not through our action. It's not through our assertion. It's not through us getting things done so much as it is being in a space of receptivity, in a space of presence that is most allowing us to be a conduit of Eros. And this is what it means to have an atonement. This is what it means to have a spaciousness that allows for God to be in us, or divinity or source or whatever that is. And that these retrograde periods, are asking us not to go, and we may be afraid, we may be thwarted. That's kind of the point. But it's in those spaces, can we not numb ourselves? In those spaces, can we not go and avoid feeling the discomfort? Can we sit with the pain and be a new type of hero? Be a new type of hero like Richard Rohr speaks about, where he says, the classic tradition of the true hero is not our present understanding. So the new type of hero that he's asking for is actually more of a classic hero. He says it's not a hero about being bold or muscular or rich or famous or talented or fantastic by oneself and often for oneself. But the classical hero is someone who goes the distance, does whatever it takes, has integrity and impeccability with their word all the way through. And the true heroism is in service. It's in service for the common good. And it's not about the Leo, because this is going to be in Leo, this Martian. It's not about the Leo being the one that wants all the attention, all the glory, all the fame, but it's about service to something greater than ourselves. But only after we've healed and found wholeness in ourselves, found our capacity to love ourselves, and that we're not out there trying to change the world so that we feel better, but we're emanating from a space because that is just who we are. We are giving birth to light. And he says that the hero lives in a deep time and not just their own small time. The hero is by definition a generative person, and it has authentic life energy. It's a surplus or an abundance of life. It's not about seeking one's American Idol fame, power, salary, or talent. This is not to be a hero or to be a celebrity. We were meant to thrive and not survive. And this thriving can only happen as we work together. It's our capacity to work together and to be compassionate and understand others and to hold space for others and to have deep presence and faith and belief that we can work with people that aren't like us, that are different, that have opposite thoughts. It's our capacity to listen and to hold space and to let go of our thinking that we are right. This is what this retrograde energy asks. And this is the private salvation project, as Thomas Merton calls it. This is where you have to get out of your own house, your own castle, and get out of the way that we've done things. Leave your ways, leave the way that you think, and to be in a new space. And James Hollis said this beautifully when he says, the world is more magical, less predictable, more autonomous, less controllable, more varied, less simple, more infinite, less knowable, more wonderfully troubling than we could have imagined being able to tolerate when we were young. Again, going back to this notion of discharging our loyal soldier, there's a wonderful story that Richard Rohr has about speaking about the Japanese after World War II, where Japanese communities had the savvy to understand that many of their returning soldiers were not fit or prepared to re-enter civil or humane society. Their only identity for their formative years had been to be a loyal soldier to their country. They needed a broader identity to once again rejoin their communities as useful citizens. So these Japanese communities created a communal ritual whereby a soldier was publicly thanked and praised effusively for his service to the people. After this was done at great length, an elder would stand and announce with authority something to this effect: "The war is over now. The community needs you to let go of what has served you and served us well up to now. The community needs you to return as a man, a citizen, and something beyond a soldier." This process called discharging our loyal soldier. This is the kind of closure much needed. And this is what this retrograde period can give us. We can discharge our loyal soldiers, the soldiers that can't see how we can reconcile, that can't see that there's a way forward, that can't see that there's anything but more of the same, or a better world, but only through destruction and demise and war and battle. This retrograde period can ask us to look at Mars and look at these energies from a completely different point of view, something that's more of the mystical, something that's more of the magical, something from a more holy place, something that's going to take us to another place, that we don't have to see these times when we have pain and strife and struggle as the end, but as an opportunity to begin, as a new opportunity to begin to understand what it is to reconcile with the parts of ourselves that we most distrust, the parts of ourselves that we do not care for. How can we hold those parts while continuing to keep our energy high, to keep our energy in a state of hope and belief and faith and love? This is what this period is about. We have Mars retrograde, as we have Mercury retrograde, as we have Pluto entering to Aquarius, as we have these energies and these periods of time that are on the surface difficult, and they are difficult and they are challenging. But the point that Richard Rohr makes so beautifully is that there is no way to get to the second stage of life, to this period, this maturation, to a place that's spiritual maturity, without going through the struggle, without going through the abyss, without going through the rebirth and the struggle. Can we find another way to go through this? Can we find another way that can trust magic? When you first discharge your loyal soldier, it will feel like a loss of faith or a loss of self, but it is only the death of the full self, and is often very much the birth of the soul. And this comes from Annie Dillard. And the deeps are the violence and terror of which psychology has warned us. But if you ride these monsters down, if you drop with them farther over the world's rims, you find what our sciences cannot locate or name: the substrate, the ocean, or matrix, or either, which buoys the rest, which gives goodness its power for good and evil its power of evil. The unified field, our complex and inexplicable caring for each other and for our life together. This is given, it is not learned. The tragic sense of life. We have an opportunity to have a tragic sense of life, something beyond the Newtonian worldview, something beyond the American first worldview, something beyond a worldview that man makes right, might makes right, something beyond to a supernatural, something mystical, something magical. It is not a one-size-fits-all. This is a God that adjusts. This is a divinity that just adjusts to our life. This is not the bed of Procrustes. The rules are not as important as the relationship. The relationships are what's most important. The relationships with each other, the relationships with ourselves. How do we relate is only when we can be in a space of empathy, when we can be in a space of compassion, when we can be in a space of holding the other. This is the only way. It's only apparent retrograde. It actually isn't moving backward. It's just here to help us transform. That is the regeneration. That is the retrograde.